Shalom, in the perhaps slightly unenviable position of wanting to share a few words this morning, which is a morning, as we've been saying, of great paradox, of rejoicing and heartbreak in the same breath. In any case, it is a comfort to be together, and it's a comfort to have this tree of life of the Torah and of the tradition to hold on to be strengthened by. And it also seems to me that this holiday of Shemini Atzeret, which is this holiday we're celebrating today, it's the most liminal of the liminal, the most paradoxical of the paradoxical, and it teaches us, if anything, it teaches us that it's never the liminal, which means to be at a gateway, at a doorway, the edge between things, teaches us that it's never either or. It's always both and. It's always above and beyond, I want to say, because this 8th day of assembly, Shmini Chaka Etzeret, is, in a way, it's its own holiday, but in a way, it's also a continuation or a culmination, not just of Sukkot, but of this whole period of the calendar we've been working up to today. And there's a famous, but if it weren't the 8th, if it's its own holiday, it's the 8th day off, right? It has to be the 8th day off something. I'll come back to that. But there's a famous midrash that says this 8th day, Shmini Chag HaAtzeret, is like the after party, where God is like, don't go home just yet. Stay another day, hang out with me a little longer. But that's on the back of the whole holiday of Sukkot, which is supposed to be the most universalist of all the holidays. You'll notice in the Maftir we read this morning from the Pinchas Torah that on Shmini Atzeret we go back to offering just a very few sacrifices, but all the way through Sukkot we have offered many bulls each day, and these are said to represent, it adds up to 70 bulls representing the 70 nations of the world, the most universalist of all the holidays. And as you're probably familiar, most of the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah isn't really talking about the Jewish people, it's talking about all people and God as the sovereign of all creation. So this particularist thing that we're in right now is on the back of the most universalist. We're special as Jews because we're human beings. Not just because we're Jews, because we're Jewish human beings. And the first and most important thing is to be human beings and to remember that all human beings are made in the very image of the Creator, with something of that divine consciousness. That's why we say in our Modim prayer in the center of the Amidah, when we repeat it in the Chazarah, we say we call God not just Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu, not just the God of our ancestors, but Elohei Chol Basar, the God of all flesh. Yotzreinu, Yotzer Bereshit, the one who forms us, the one who forms all of creation. And that's why our Torah isn't just the Torah that tells the story of us as the Jewish people, but it says this is the story of all creation. So here we are today, and we are, many of us, horrified and heartbroken and terrified, thinking of the loss of life, of the people killed in Israel, and the people apparently also taken hostage, the wounded. We're also, many of us, afraid for family and friends who may be called up as reservists, who may be seeing active combat. And many of us, myself, I'll just speak for myself, also am heartbroken for the people of Gaza, who not only live under an oppressive fundamentalist regime, but also have been subject to much violence themselves. Medical blockade, aerial bombardment. These are also our family. They're our family, they're our cousins, and they're also our human family. And we can't lose sight of the fact that much as it may be easier to be terrified the Israelis, we need to be terrified the Palestinians as well, who are also, we I'm afraid, probably going to see horrific reprisals in the coming days and weeks. And none of this is right. None of this is right. And I'm scared to say this because I know it's easier for us as Jews to focus on Jewish suffering, but it's all connected. It's all connected. And it's not the wrong time to think about Palestinian suffering in a moment like this, because it's all connected. These holidays, the holiday of Sukkot, we use this image of the circle that goes round and around. We walk in circles around and around. We talk about the cycle of life that goes around and around. A time for weeping and a time for celebrating, as Yehuda Amichai points out, often the same time. And here we are in this middle point of that circle where we're sandwiched right between the memory of that which is past, the Yizkor, for the souls who have gone on before us, and the prayers for rain, prayer for new life, for this cycle of the seasons to continue in a way that brings life, not just death. I also can't help thinking, though, in this context of what some folks here may be already familiar with, which is called the cycle of violence, which, there's very specifically the idea that a victim all too easily becomes a perpetrator. And then a perpetrator becomes a bystander because they don't know how to intervene because their own moral sensibility has been corrupted by being a perpetrator. And then a bystander themselves becomes a victim because they're frozen and don't know how to respond appropriately. And then a victim becomes a perpetrator. And it's said that every perpetrator in the world thinks that they're a victim. It's easier to focus on the victim part. It's harder to focus on the perpetrator part, but it's all a cycle. It goes around and around. But as we prepare to daven Musaf and call in this life-giving rain, and we'll remember that actually the word Torah comes from that same root as the word Yoreh, which means early rain. It's that which comes from heaven to earth to give life. That which goes around and around, the water cycle, as we read in Ecclesiastes, it goes back to heaven and comes down again in new form, old but new, old but new. And I was struck in particular to see the oldest member of this congregation, the Pinchas Torah, today being addressed by the youngest person in the room. There is a way in which life persists and continues. Perhaps you're even younger. I apologize, but maybe you weren't in the room at the time. That we also, this holiday of the 8, the 8 is 2 circles on top of each other, right? And it's, not only is it the same as the infinity symbol on its side, but in the Jewish tradition that 8 also represents that which transcends, which goes above and beyond. When you think of 7 is the days of creation, so 7 represents the 6 directions, and the 7, the center which is within, the presence of the sacred which dwells within everything. But 8 is about transcending and including, being both and, going above and beyond. Going above and beyond. That's why we have Brit Milah on the 8th day. That's why this 8th day is special. Shavuot's also the 8th day. Yom Kippur is also the 8th day after the end of Rosh Hashanah, and it's the 8th day of the high priest's preparations. He also does his business with the 1 and the 7. It's all about the 8. And those Kabbalists amongst us will remember that above and beyond, or within and throughout, the 7th Sphira, which represent our reality, is Bina. The 8th Sphira is the Sphira which holds it all. It's what we call the motherboard. And when we can reach into that mother of all creation, that is actually, say the mystics, where we can make a change, where reality becomes different. The future actually becomes different. So before we dive in Musaf, we're going to do a Hefi Kedusha so that we can really we can just go deeply in and daven together and then complete our prayers. After the prayers for rain, we'll end the tefillah on our own. I really encourage you, everyone, to daven. I'm going to share just very briefly this story. This is a story of one of the early Hasidic rabbis, Kuznets Maggid. And he tells a story of a prince who was sent out from the house of the king. In case anyone's missing what this metaphor represents, this is the Jews, or possibly the human soul. who is sent out from the presence of the great overlord, the great sovereign, the creator. And this prince fell in with not the best company and really kind of forgot his royalty. He forgot his royal nature. And he lived a long time like that. But then, ultimately, his father, the king, was moved to send an emissary to go and find out how his son was doing, what his situation was, who he was hanging out with, and if he needed anything. When the emissary reached the prince, he brought greetings from his father, and he said, "Do you need anything?" And what did the prince say? The prince said, "Yeah, actually, I do. I really, if you could ask, I would really appreciate. What I actually really need is a new pair of boots. My shoes are completely worn out, and I need a new pair of boots." But when he heard this, the servant of the king, his heart broke open, and he burst into tears. But he said, "The king is offering you anything you want. You are the king's son. And what you're asking for is a new pair of boots. You can ask for anything you want, even to be restored to your status, to remember fully who you are." Now, this is a story that's told particularly for these final days of Hoshana Rabbah and Shemini Atzeret, that on this day of our particularity, which stands on the back of our humanity, we should remember who we are. We should remember that we are actually God's children, and that nothing is too big for us to ask for. That a change in a situation is not too big to ask for. That this is the time to pray for the breaking of that cycle of violence. The breaking open of our hearts with compassion and understanding that we're part of the human family. Their suffering is our suffering is their suffering. That this is a time, as we're at this turn of the year where we're praying for new life, that we should really be praying hard. If we believe in prayer at all, which we may not, but here we are in Shul at the end of several weeks of serious praying. This is the moment to really go for it and pray for everything that we've maybe been holding back for ourselves, but also for our whole community, our whole society, and this whole planet, which is desperately in need of healing, of breaking the cycles, to make a new circuit, a new cycle, something which goes above and beyond, and brings the presence of the Creator more and more awareness of our divine being into each and every one of us. Shabbat Shalom.
We're going to play